Hello, and welcome to another conversation with innovators making an impact throughout flyover country. I am Tom Cottingham. I'm CEO of Flyover Future, Flyover Media. And today I'm happy to have Elyse, who is well entrenched in the innovation economy in the Akron, Cleveland area. He currently serves as executive director of the Akron Research Foundation, and which sounds like a very cool job. And so first, welcome, Elyse, and thanks for
Thank you.
joining us.
It's good to be
Um,
here, Tommy.
it sounds really neat. Tell us a little bit about what the Akron Research Foundation does and your role as executive director.
So we're the University of Akron Research Foundation, and we were originally formed about 20 years ago to kind of commercialize technology that was coming out of University of Akron labs. But over time, we started kind of developing these programs and developing expertise, a lot of it around innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology commercialization. And we really thought, why not open this up to the broader community? And that's been one of the best decisions we've ever made because it helps expand our impact, but we also have found, with the innovators that are coming from university campuses, sometimes that can feel very separate from the broader community. That sort of town gown thing, and one of the
Right.
most important things, if whether you're a student or a faculty member that's maybe hoping to have an impact with a product or service or technology idea you have, is like accessing resources that are beyond the bounds of campus. So, by having this sort of broader perspective, we found it helps people to network to others and at other universities, as well as just out there in the broader community, and just become aware of more resources, more perspectives, and in a lot of cases forming some really meaningful relationships that also we know are just critical, especially if you're an entrepreneur. One of the critical things is being supported and having a network of people that can give you advice when you need that, but also, kind of commiserate with you,
Yeah,
or
a
sort of
shoulder to
validate
cry
maybe some
on.
of the challenges that you're facing in a positive way as well. So yeah, we found that just bringing everyone together, which we do through a number of our programs, bringing everyone together several times a year is a great mission for us. So we do a lot of teaching in that space.
I think it's so valuable. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and that's four companies, maybe five. Um, but but that's only four or five. And you think about the domain expertise that you guys have and all of the things you've seen and the mistakes that people kind of constantly, make unless someone points them in a different direction. So I think that, you know, all of this experience that you have and watching all of these entrepreneurs and networking with these guys over the years is just huge value to entrepreneurs. Because, it's not like they've done a dozen companies, or most haven't, right? And we don't have a lot of experience. You start a company and you get involved in, day to day, and that's what you do. So I can see where that's a huge advantage. And so how far does your geographic reach extend to right now?
So we actually, through some of our programs, particularly the I-Corps program, we serve anybody in Ohio. So literally anywhere within the state. And I think we'll get into I-Corps a little bit more later. Also,
Yeah.
there are other versions of this program in other states. So your state very likely has one, no matter where you are in the Midwest. And then some of our programs, especially those that are more in-person centric, like we have a sort of later stage program called the Stride Accelerator that we run with Bounce Innovation Hub. That's for companies that are within a sort of 22-ish county region in Northeast Ohio. So
Okay.
that would include things like Akron, Cleveland, Canton, and Youngstown.
Right. And are there certain areas that the ecosystem is focused on? Or are you pretty broad in the types of startups you support?
So for our earlier stage programs, it's really anybody that has a differentiated business idea. So it doesn't have to be high tech, but it does have to be sort of distinctly different. There has to be some component to it that makes it unique, because
Right.
that's part of what our program does, is sort of testing, is that a valuable aspect, or is that something that customers don't really care about? In terms of the late stage work that we do, like I serve on a number of startup boards and things like that as well. Those are typically with companies that have a high tech physical product.
Right.
The area that we sometimes call hard tech. So that's partly just me. That's sort of where my passion lies, is working, building something, but on the sort of tech side of things.
Right. Right. So there's lots of opportunities across a broad spectrum. You mentioned iCore, and that's one of the things I kind of want to drill down on because I've been so impressed with the program, and then I think I was telling you we talked to Stephen Von Rump the other day and asked him about what entrepreneurs really need to focus on. And I know it's not a new idea, but it's important, which is customer discovery. And when you and I talked last time, you were telling me about what iCore is doing along those lines. And I just thought it was not only interesting, but really useful for anybody out there contemplating or in the middle of doing a startup. Because there's a real methodology to it that makes it more effective than just conversations with your friends and family, right? So tell us a little bit about iCore, it's National Science Foundation, and then specifically maybe drill down a little bit on what you guys are doing with customer discovery and iCore and their training and programs.
Yeah, so iCore is a National Science Foundation developed curriculum that teaches customer discovery. And some of the aspects that make it unique are kind of that it was originally created for people like scientists and engineers. So it is very tactical and literal in how you do this work, which I think can be really beneficial for everyone.
Sure.
So it's, there are some philosophical elements to what we do, but it's not all sort of pie in the sky stuff, right? We really dive into like, how do you do this and how do you do this well? In terms of what we focus on in the iCore program, and these are probably broader tips about customer discovery as well. One thing that's really critical is you have to actually do the customer discovery. So this is one of those things that you could spend 100 hours reading about it, or you could spend 30 or 40 hours doing customer interviews, and you're going to learn a lot more from the 30 or 40 hours doing the customer interviews. In our version of the iCore program, teams are required to do a minimum of 21 customer interviews. And the
Wow.
reason that we have that number is, first of all, it's convenient because it's 3 a week. It's a 7-week long program. But also we found that really somewhere in that like 15 to 20 interview range is where people, it really starts to click. Like you feel like you're getting much better at it. You really feel like
That makes
that
sense.
skill is starting to develop, and you're starting to actually, by that point, get really actionable, meaningful feedback from your customers, in part because you're just asking better questions. But I think there's no substitute for actually doing the interviews. Some other things, though, that we also teach in iCore that I think are really critical for anyone who's trying to do customer discovery. One is defining that customer base. So, we talk a lot about who your customer segment is. You talked about interviewing, your brother, your friend who lives down the street. That can
Right.
be a valid source of your second interview if they actually are somebody who might buy your product. But you really have to get out there in the sort of broader community, talking to people that you don't know, and who don't know what you're trying to build, ideally, so that you're getting sort of unvarnished feedback on maybe problems that people have, needs they want to fill, that might be relevant to what you were planning to create or build, or whatever you were thinking your company would do. But being really intentional about what that customer segment looks like, because we tend to get some people where it's like they've only talked to friends and family members. There's some people who are like, oh, it's everyone. If I'm
Right.
in
Yeah.
line at
Right.
Subway, I ask people questions, and that, as entrepreneurs, we have very limited resources pretty much always. So having a targeted customer segment that is all, has the exact same needs, so you don't have to build 50 different versions of the product, and talks about the problem in the same way, and, is on the same social media platforms or newsletters or subscribes to the same magazines, where you kind of know how to get in touch with them, right? All of that can be really valuable in terms of, that's why we try to define a narrow customer segment. I think that's extremely valuable. The other thing that we find is if you define a narrow customer segment, right, and it doesn't really land with one, you can define a different customer segment and it may land with them.
Right.
And the other thing that we try to focus on is, what we call hypothesis development, or hypotheses of the value proposition, which is just a fancy way of saying, like, what value does this provide to customers? And the reason that we talk about developing a hypothesis is the scientists out there may know, right? The hypothesis is something that you're
Test
actually
it.
trying to prove false, right? You're not trying to prove it true. You're trying to see, like, is there a way I can prove this false? And then, in that process, you're going to, at a minimum, refine, right? Get a much better hypothesis. But the other thing that we found is that when people go out and just sort of have random conversations. You can have really lovely conversations, but people will have 20 conversations with different customers and still not really be sure what they learned. Whereas if you're going out with a mindset that, I have this hypothesis that I'm testing, and my goal in the interview is to learn these 2 or 3 things that would be relevant to that, you're going to get a lot more out of every single customer interaction. So you're not, we know entrepreneurs are busy, so that you're not wasting your time collecting a lot of information that may not be relevant to what you're hoping to
Well,
do.
and our memory is selective too, right? And so having a very structured approach and then writing down, or recording, however you do it, the responses. Because, I mean, I guess depending on our personality types, we remember, the bad things more than the good, or vice versa. But, I, 3 of us had a conversation, we would all walk away with, slightly different versions of what took place. So I can see where that's super valuable. And I like the idea of I'm going in this to prove the hypothesis wrong, right? Rather than latch on to any positive thing anyone says. And, in those casual conversations, nobody's going to bust you up about your product, at a dinner party or, at a ball game or something, right? They're not going to get really hardcore. They're going to be nice. And so you really do need those structured questions and that structured approach. And I think that 15 to 20 number is really interesting. That makes sense, right? You've got to do it for a while and start to get used to the feedback, and not be asking people leading questions, right? Because I know that's a problem, I have, right? When you're talking about your product, of course, you're going to love this, right? It's the coolest thing ever. Do you get into pricing at all on these customer discoveries?
We do not in our program. So, 20 is kind of the starting point. But yeah, people get into pricing all the time. So 20 is the starting point. You've developed a lot of those skills. There are more intensive versions of the I-Core program, especially through a lot of the federal agencies, where people will go out and do 100 customer interviews. In those cases, they are getting into pricing, both sort of strategically, what kind of revenue streams are you using, and then also pricing tactics. And there's a very structured way that they teach for doing that as well. And it's absolutely something that you can apply to pricing. But what we found, where we found entrepreneurs tend to get tripped up, and where we can have the biggest impact, is just simply figuring out, who is that targeted customer? We call them customer segments, but kind of, what characteristics does the person have, whether it's in terms of, maybe their job roles and responsibilities, or if it's, more of a consumer product, right? Like their interests and hobbies, like or family situation or whatever, how do we define that customer? And then, like, where we find people most often get tripped up is they've either defined the wrong customer, or they think the customer has a problem they either don't have or just don't care enough to solve, right? We all have problems where it's like,
The
yeah, I
game's
know I
got to
could do
be.
better here, but I just don't care enough to actually, and it's so easy anymore to just Google a solution, but there are tons of problems that we all have in our lives that it doesn't rise to the level where I'm going to spend 10 minutes on Google or ChatGPT trying to figure out what the solution is. I'm just going to sort of live with things the way they are. So that's where we find
Yes.
entrepreneurs, if you don't get those things right, you can have the most brilliant pricing model of all time and the best sales team, and you're still going to struggle to succeed. And so by getting those pieces right early on, you really set up the entire business for success, on essentially every dimension that you're shooting for.
The pain's got to be, I mean, the gain's got to be an order of magnitude bigger than the pain, right? I mean, I'm not going to relearn how to do something I've been doing for X, years or months or whatever, unless there's a huge advantage. Because you're right, we don't have time, and we all put up with those things. And that is something entrepreneurs, especially tech people. I mean, I've been in tech my entire career. It's like, we can do this. It's really cool. And you're like, it is really cool, but no one's going to find it cool enough to spend, a few hours changing the way they do something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really valid point. Um, have you had any really interesting success stories coming out of Akron, recently that have kind of been through the program and learned how to do this?
Yeah, I mean, always we always have great projects going through the program. So in terms of large scale success, a couple of the companies who'd gone through our program in the early days, so let's say, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we had two companies that have exited, right? So they built to kind of a relatively large point, and then a much larger company
Right.
acquired them, and everybody got to celebrate that and make some money along the way. And the one that I was most involved in of those two had a different method for essentially manufacturing adhesive. So they were
Okay.
using it was a very technical process called electrospinning, but the bottom line was they were able to create adhesives that had a much higher surface area than if you just sort of coated an adhesive on a backing. And that meant that the adhesive behaved a lot differently, so you could hang a lot of weight from it, but it could still peel off of surfaces relatively
Really?
easily.
It sounds like
So
something on an
yeah,
infomercial, right?
yeah, so
Like you can
yeah,
hang your
as
car
seen
on
on
it and
TV.
peel it right off.
You could, and we made some videos that looked very much like that, right? We're like, oh,
Right.
or make your own Spider-Man suit, right? But they did come up with some more feasible sort of targeted applications for where this would be really useful. And it was a range of things, a lot of which were sort of business applications. So things like
Sure.
wiring harnesses inside cars and things like that I know nothing about. Um, but it was a great example of something that technically was extremely impressive. But it took some real effort to sort of build and figure out like where would this actually be used, and who do we partner with to bring this to market and those kinds of things. And customer discovery was central, every step of the way for that.
Well, you
Um,
mentioned tech transfer, and I mean that's got to be one of the issues, right? Because someone comes up with, like you say, a technology for adhesive without necessarily an application in mind, right? It's like this is something really cool. We figured out how to do this. Surely it will be useful, right? Um, and then you guys can step in. How do you get involved in helping um, hook entrepreneurs up with funding at all?
a little bit. Right. So the two areas in which we're working right now, one is the federal SBIR and STTR programs. So these are grants for small businesses to conduct cutting edge research. And those are typically sort of written applications. And so we actually have some funding from the Small Business Administration to just help companies assess whether the program is right for them, where they might apply, and then actually, do some of the really tactical stuff again. It's just a pain in the rear, like getting the right registrations in place, understanding the formats that documents need to be in. And a lot of that sounds kind of silly, but our thing is, if we can cut out hours and hours of learning for the
Oh yeah,
entrepreneurs
that's
and
huge.
let them focus on what really matters, which is the narrative part of the proposal, which is like what they want to do and what they're being assessed on, by sort of giving them a lot more, input on these other sort of the requirements, but they're not sufficient to get funded, but like those sort of baseline things to get
Right.
in place. And then another thing that we've been doing more recently is to some extent sort of applying the I-Corps process to going out and looking for investors. So,
Makes sense.
helping entrepreneurs who are maybe not quite ready to raise funding start to form relationships with either other entrepreneurs in their space or investors to literally understand. We make the same mistakes with investors, right? We make assumptions about maybe what they're interested in, and a quick 15-minute conversation where you've thought through some pointed questions that you need to ask to understand, are they even a good fit for my venture,
Right.
at this stage or whatever, can be extremely helpful. And it helps to form those relationships, right? That's one of the
Exactly
other
right.
outcomes of I-Corps customer discovery, right? Is, you know, we encourage people to do that customer discovery before they spend a lot of time building, because you can save yourself a lot of money by not building,
Yeah.
prototypes that aren't really targeted to the customer properly. But that's also a great way to form relationships so that when you do build the prototypes and you need, feedback on drawings, or you need, feedback on feature sets or beta
Right.
testers. You
UI or
have a lot
whatever.
of
Right.
those relationships that have been literally at that point in time for a lot of people going back a year or two because they started talking to people before they started building, figured out who they clicked with, who they felt was sort of most important for them to keep working with, and just kind of, chatted with them, once a quarter, once every 6 months as they were kind of developing. And then they had this sort of built-in group of, supporters or beta testers or whatever they're looking for.
Well, I was part of a panel. I know it was probably a year or two ago, but and they were trying to define um, who successful people. And one of the theories that I think a lot of people agreed with was they have two common denominators. I mean, they're smart, but they're really good storytellers and they're great at building relationships. And that's so important, those relationships. And if someone's willing to spend, an hour talking to you about a product that may or may not exist, they've got something vested in it as well, right? And I think they like the opportunity to have some influence perhaps over, the next wave of products or technologies that are, going to affect them and their job. So, and maintaining those relationships is so important. Like you said, even if you've got nothing to say, just drop it a line. How's it going? Right? I mean, because yeah, you'll want to come back to them time and time again and ask them about UI and features, like you said, and pricing perhaps down the line. Any final thoughts or words of advice about this customer discovery process? I mean, I guess obviously sign up for the iCore course is the
Yeah, I
simplest
think
thing.
the iCore course is great if you can find a way to make that work, because you're going to get the iCore course really puts a premium on entrepreneurs' time. So it is a lot of work, but we are gonna, like, in the hour or two workshops that you would attend throughout that program, we're gonna cram more into that than you would, 2 or 3 times the amount of sort of information and tips and things than you could get probably doing that same research on your own. So I think,
Right.
I think the two things I really like about iCore are, like, you've sort of got this process from people who've done this literally hundreds of times in a lot of cases, giving you that input, but also the accountability, right? We all know that we need to be accountable, and customer
Yeah.
discovery, especially if you're new to it, really can feel very intimidating or very awkward. And that's again why we try to get people to a point where they're much more comfortable conducting the customer interviews, and they've also had that experience of, like, you'll be amazed. I mean, I've had experiences where I've been doing customer interviews. People have called me from, like, flights when they were leaving for vacation, someone I never talked to before, had no idea who I was.
Really.
But, I said, hey, can you help me understand a little bit about X, which was, well within their area of expertise. And they were just happy to do it. And I was like, I've been blown away by people going out of their way to sort of help you and give you info. Also, people love to complain. So that's the other thing that you find in iCore is, like, if you actually do hit on a problem for someone, you're going to get a lot of information, because they will they'll appreciate talking to you as much as you appreciate listening to them.
Yeah, you kind of know when you've hit a chord, right? And they all of a sudden they start saying, yeah, that's broken and that's broken. And yeah. And you start to think maybe I do have a solution that would work. Anything coming up this spring in the next few months that you want to talk about that's happening in Akron at the Research Institute around this topic?
Yeah,
You
so I
having
mean,
any of your meetups?
we have an iCore program that starts every spring, summer, and fall. So the May, sometime in mid to late May, is the deadline to apply to iCore, and you can find that out on our website, which I'm guessing you'll probably put kind of in the notes with the video. There's also a less intensive program called Starting Line. So if you're not sure if iCore is for you, or you think I can't commit to specific meeting times, that's an online self-paced program that, frankly, at this point in time, it's a relatively newer program for us. We've had maybe 50 or 100 entrepreneurs participate over the last couple of years, but would love to get new people in. So if anybody is interested in that, really anywhere in Ohio, or even if you're particularly passionate about it, you're outside of Ohio, drop us a line and see if that's something you do, because that is, all of these programs are held mainly online. And then, yeah, of course, we're doing meetups at Bounce Innovation Hub in Akron. That's one of our are key partners and I think a key resource for the Akron community. So we have like roughly monthly, every month or two, we'll have just sort of meet up coffee hour or evening hour there to just kind of touch base with people. And that's also a great place. If you're interested in these programs, but aren't really sure what they're all about, there will be plenty of people who have gone through them at these same events that would be
Right.
happy to, you know, chat with you and tell you about their experiences. And I'm sure like the amazing business that they're working on at that time.
Yeah, right.
And to hear about yours. Yeah.
Sure. Well, it is really important for entrepreneurs to be able to network with each other and realize that, you know, they're not alone and people are making the same mistakes they made. And there are people that are a few steps ahead of them that can maybe give them advice. I sometimes think that, and, you know, being one, entrepreneurs are a little bit like talking to your 16-year-old, right? Who's like, you don't understand, you know, you were never in love. You were never 16. You're like, no, actually, we were all your age and we've been there. And so having experienced entrepreneurs around can save you time and money. Thank you so much for this. It's been really useful, I think. I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing. And I think this I-Core customer discovery is something that will require some time and discipline, but will pay off in spades. And you definitely, like you said, you want to do this before you have built the whole house, and before you go out and start talking to people about raising money. Not necessarily before you go build those relationships, but before you really start to quantify what you're doing. Spend the 7 weeks or more and do it. I mean, a lot of smart entrepreneurs are saying this is essential. So thanks for giving us some insight into that. And people can go to the website. It will be, you know, on the video in the notes, and look at the accelerated course or the 7-week course. And you do them every quarter or 3 times.
Oh, we do them 3 times a year.
So there's lots of opportunities. So you live in Ohio or nearby and want to go to Akron, you all know where to stop, and you can call Elyse and she'll take you to a ball game and show you around town. No, it's great that you guys are doing that. And, you know, places all over flyover country like Akron are doing amazing things. And, you know, getting the word out is, I think, important for entrepreneurs to hear and investors to hear. There are a lot of advantages to being in places like Akron, you know, in Louisville and St. Louis and things. And we just want the rest of the world to know that there's tons of resources for entrepreneurs, and you're one of the great ones. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks everybody for listening. All right. Have a great afternoon.